Hello and welcome to the audio recording of the book Tarona's Ghostly Encounters. These are accounts of real situations which occurred while Tarona was working as a paranormal investigator. So hold on to your seats.
Chapter 7. Ghost of Tragic Lady Jane. Strange Vibration on Battlefield. Hall haunted by daughter's ghost. Ghost of animals. Mysterious happenings at Taylor's and Down Mine. Anniversary ghosts are often reported as being seen at the same time and place each year. One of the most famous of these ghosts is Lady Jane Grey. When she was a child, she lived in a house in Bradgate Park. There have been many reported sightings of a spirit which is believed to haunt the park each Christmas Eve. Even tales of headless horses have been reported. Some of the stories tell of Lady Jane sitting in a coach, holding her head on her knees. The sad ending to the tragic life of this young girl, who was killed in 1553 after reigning as queen for only 9 days, is bound to promote fanciful tales. I have never seen a headless ghost, but know of several people, myself included, who have seen the spirits of a number of ghosts in that area. One of them, who could be Lady Jane Grey, appears to be dressed in a long green dress of that period. I am unsure of what coloured hair Lady Jane was supposed to have, but the spirit I saw had bright red hair. Many battlegrounds are supposed to be haunted, and for whatever reason, a headless soldier tends to be the most popular sighting. After visiting the Boswood battlefield for myself, I can most definitely say there is a very strange vibration on the land, but this does not necessarily mean it is haunted. It is not hard to imagine the horror that took place in the conflict between Richard and the future King Henry VII and their men when they were fighting. The land would of course feel stress, and this is why many ancient sites carry the pains of the past. The land is just too blood-soaked to show anything else but stress and disease. So again, we could have a battlefield that on certain days or times replays its battle for the silent watchers. I had been doing an after-luncheon talk at a beautiful old pub restaurant at Sutton Chesney when one of the women told me a tale about a nearby hall and its ghost. It is said that the previous owner had wanted his daughter's boyfriend killed because he disapproved of their love affair. It is believed he tampered with the bridge the young man used to reach the lovers' meeting place, but that day the boy was delayed and the owner's daughter crossed the bridge searching for her boyfriend. The bridge collapsed, drowning her. It is believed her ghost still haunts the hall at certain times of the year. Many theatres are said to be haunted, and this includes Leicester Haymarket Theatre. Although I was aware of a child's presence while seeing a show a time back, I could not say for certain if the child was male or female. There is a story of a young boy dressed in a sailor suit who haunts the building. This ghost has been seen by numerous actors and theatre staff alike and tends to show itself when children are in the cast. Could the spirit keep coming back to look for its former home? The Haymarket was built on land that used to have many Victorian terraced houses on it. It's not only human ghosts that haunt sites and houses, sometimes it is the ghost of animals. This wrecks the theory that animals have no souls. One of my clients told me how she had lost her beautiful Persian cat to cancer earlier in the year, and because she had to have him put to sleep, she was devastated by his loss. She went on to tell me that a few days after he died, she was awakened at 2 a.m. and was made aware that someone was standing at the front of her bed. She was able to make out the figure of a woman. The woman was carrying her cat in its arms. The ghostly spirit put down the cat, who was purring, and the next thing she felt was a warm sensation as the cat started snuggling into her leg. My client swore she could feel the warmth of his body, and she reached out to stroke him. At that moment, the entity reached over, picked up the cat, and both disappeared. Of course, this could all be put down to wishful thinking on the part of the owner, but nevertheless this still does not answer the question as to why so many people who have never owned a pet still see the spirit of animals. The new salon of a beautician in Leicester was haunted by the ghost of a cat, which she had seen on many occasions. It was not so much the cat's ghost that bothered her, but the strong smell that accompanied it. I had personally searched the building with her to see if there was any way a living cat could have got in and was leaving its scent. Unless the cat was able to let itself in and out through the letterbox, the smell was not being left by any living animal. One woman who contacted me to tell me of a ghostly encounter after hearing me on BBC Radio told me of the experience she had had when first moving to the district. The lady and her husband were staying in a former vicarage, and after having dinner they decided to return to their bedroom. During the night the woman was awakened by an elderly lady dressed in clothes from the Victorian era. As the elderly lady came nearer, she began to feel a choking sensation in her throat. The entity appeared to glide down one side of the bed and bend over her, staring at her for a moment or two. Then she disappeared. When she spoke to the owners the next morning, they told her that a vicar's wife had been found strangled in this house at the turn of the century. The murderer had never been found, and every time a stranger stayed in the house, the ghost returned to satisfy herself it was not her killer. The A60 between Loughborough and Nottingham has had its fair share of sightings also. The following account was relayed to me by a Loughborough couple. A few months previously, the woman and her husband were travelling along the A60 for a night out in Nottingham, and ahead of them they could make out the shape of a man crossing the road. Instead of him reaching the other side of the road, he just vanished in thin air. The couple stopped the car and looked around but could see no sign of the man. The road connecting Leicester to Melton Mowbray also has its own phantom. There have been sightings of cloaked figures and a ghostly woman who never makes it to the other side of the road. I took part in a talkback programme on BBC Radio Leicester, and I had many people from all over the district phoning in to ask me questions and to tell me about their experiences. One of the listeners was a Mrs. Johnson, who had had an encounter with a ghost many years ago. She had been a young girl at the time, but the years would never erase the memory of her experience of the supernatural. Mrs. Johnson went back to 1956 when she worked for a gentleman's tailor. One morning I arrived earlier than usual, she said, and walked through the courtyard and up to the workroom as normal. In a corner area of the room, racks of army uniforms stood. Some of these needed medal ribbons adding on, or aged ones needed replacing. I was shocked to see an old man sorting through the uniforms. He was wearing a trilby hat and either an overcoat or a trench coat. He looked at me and I could see he was old. He did not look like a solid figure. He sort of glided rather than walked up to the room. Afraid of what I had seen, I quickly closed the door and went down to the courtyard to wait for the elderly lady I worked with to arrive. On her arrival, I told her about the man and she made no comment whatsoever. Later on in the morning, I went down to make tea, having to go back upstairs to see if the cleaning lady wanted tea as well. As I did so, I overheard my workmate talking to another member of staff. The kid, meaning me, was not lying. I've seen him myself. It's Mr. Smith. He has come back for his medals. I hurried back down to make the tea, not letting on that I'd heard what had been said. The subject was never raised again. The only comment I could add, continued Mrs. Johnson, is that the man must have been an officer, because ordinary soldiers would not have been able to afford to deal with such a high-class tailor. Some of the uniforms have been there for some time, maybe even from World War I, or from the time of the occupation of empire countries such as India. The woman told me she finished her apprenticeship and moved to another tailor's. The store changed hands many years ago and it is called something else now. Another listener rang in with the following story. The first time I saw a ghost I was around the age of 20 years, he said. I was working as a coal miner in a local pit. I was on the roadway sitting on a stone dust bag and was alone at the time. Then in the distance I could see someone coming. It was one of the deputies and I knew this because they carry an oil lamp on their belts. I'd just been sitting down for a moment before starting work when I could see him walking towards me. How we got there so fast, goodness knows, but I looked up at him and expected to get told off for sitting down. I said hello to him and he just smiled at me and kept on walking. Soon he was out of sight. I got on the DAC radio and spoke to my friend called Gerald. Gerard was a little further up the roadway and I wanted to tell him the deputy was on his way so he did not get caught sleeping. The end of the shift came and I got on the local train. Gerard got on after me. He was moaning that he had been working hard all day because I had told him the deputy was coming. I started to fall out with him because he was calling me a liar. I said, don't argue with me because Don the deputy was down there. At this point, another miner joined in the conversation, telling me I'd obviously been mistaken because Don had been dead for 2 weeks now. I saw someone and I wasn't mistaken. I did see a deputy, and even if it was another deputy, there's no other way off the road. The listener went on to tell me he had been away on holiday the fortnight before and swore he had no idea that Don had died. The next story was from Miss Taylor, who told me her mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer in the summer of 1979. Although she was in a lot of pain until she died about 5 months later, she rarely complained. She was always positive whenever I spoke to her over the phone. That period in my life was doubtfully frustrating for me, but only when I was not able to help my mother with her disease. But my job meant me having to live in London at the time. I did what I could, cried, prayed, worried, and talked to both my parents as much as possible. Finally, in the winter of 1979, my mother was admitted to hospital. After visiting the hospital, I went home and desperately tried to relax and put out my mind the experiences of that day. For about 20 minutes to half hour, I smelt fresh cut flowers fill the entire room. It was as if I'd opened up a refrigerated unit in a florist shop and I'd stood there smelling the flowers. Although at the time I really did not attribute it to anything unusual, it was not until I'd received the call at 2:19 on that day that I realised what had happened. To this day, I'm not sure if it was a way for my mother to say goodbye or if it was something else, trying to prepare me for what was coming. Whatever sent me that comforting smell of flowers for that short period of time helped me to draw much strength from the experience for the difficult days that followed.